Last night, I asked my youngest daughter, Jane, for permission to share something about her, which is that she is an excellent participant in hide and seek. If you want to spend a lot of time seeking, you just ask Jane to hide anywhere, and you will find that she is very hard to find. In our Michigan house, my brother visited us once, and he's scavenging the house, and eventually you just get to the point where you're like, I give up. Where is she? And she was underneath the bathroom sink in the cabinet, like hidden underneath all of that. I saw kids playing with her, and they couldn't find her. She was in a hamper bag. I guess Friday night, I played with her, and she was in the laundry room on a shelf about 5 or 6 feet high, on a shelf with like folded blankets and towels on top of her. She's very good at it. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I could hide as well as her. She has a height advantage at this stage of her life. And many of us probably played hide and seek as kids, and maybe we grew out of it and felt like it wasn't as easy to hide. But we got pretty talented at hiding in other parts of our lives. Maybe we've hidden from some difficult conversations. Maybe if somebody was asking for volunteer support and you hid your eyes really quickly and didn't want anything to do with it. Maybe we've hidden some truths about ourselves from ourselves, and maybe we've hidden other things in our life other than our physical selves. And maybe when life gets difficult, we project this hiding ability on God, and we assume God must be hiding, God must be far away from where I am. And we assume, if God was here, things wouldn't be so difficult. Everything would be settled. God would fix my mess for me. And in today's story, we encounter Jacob fleeing from the mess that he made and surprised to find God in the middle of it. Now, I have to tell you, the lectionary jumped over some messy, mischievous Jacob stuff for us. And I want to tell you a little bit about it before we read today's text. Last week, we saw that Jacob bartered with his brother to steal his brother's birthright. And he at least got a price for it. It wasn't a great one. He gave him some soup. But in the in-between time, Jacob decides he's going to steal the blessing of his father given to his brother. And he dresses up like his brother. He gets some fur because he's not hairy enough to be his brother. And his mom is helping him in this. And I'm sure that needs some family therapy. But they trick the dad into blessing Jacob instead of Esau. And Esau, understandably, is not happy. And Esau is kind of whispering murderous threats as he's trying to unleash some of the anger inside of him. And Mama hears it. And Mama's going to protect Mama's boy and says, Jacob, you got to get out of here. And they conceive this plan of, you know what, you need to travel to your uncle's house, and maybe you can avoid the wrath of your brother. I do think they steal Esau's ability to show any forgiveness. They assume his murderous threats are going to be actualized. But Jacob goes on the run because he is chasing some escape from his life. And I hope that in the midst of reflecting on God's presence, on our own hiding, we might chase something better for ourselves this morning. And so I want to read from us from Genesis chapter 28, verse 10 through 19. Genesis tells us that Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place, and he stayed there for the night because the sun had set. And taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head, and he lay it down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on the earth, the top of it reaching up to heaven, and the angels of a God ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And then Jacob woke from his sleep, and he said, surely this place is the Lord's, and I didn't know it. And he was afraid, and he said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it. And he called the place Bethel. But the name of the city had been Luz at first. This is the word of the Lord for the people of the world. Thanks be to God. Now, our story begins with Jacob taking off from Beersheba, which, if you don't know Israelite geography, is the southernmost city. And he's going north. He's going towards kind of southeastern Turkey, towards Haran, to his uncle's house, because he's supposed to marry one of his cousins. And I just want to name the yikes of that. This is a good reminder. Don't always take any romantic relationship advice from every biblical story, literally. Now, Jacob is traveling, and it's nighttime, and he's looking for a place to stay. And it doesn't say anything about whether there was an inn or any homes that he could have stayed in. Maybe there was, and maybe he didn't trust anybody, and so maybe he's avoiding people, or maybe it's just the middle of nowhere. I do think, since the name of the city is named later, that maybe there were some people, and he just isn't going to hang out with people he doesn't know. He's a little bit, maybe doesn't trust people. But he decides he's going to sleep on the middle of the ground, and he picks the pillow of a stone. And I would have complained to room service about that pillow. That doesn't sound fun at all. It's actually one of the only kind of ancient stories where stones are said to be a pillow. And so I don't think this is meant to be customary practice. Jacob has just got some interesting sleeping habits. And somehow, despite having a stone for a pillow, he's going to get a good night's sleep and have some interesting dreams. His dream is, even though he thinks he's alone, he's not actually alone. He sees a stairway to heaven, not Led Zeppelin song playing. He doesn't see a ladder, probably. The KJV kind of has gifted us this language of a ladder that we maybe know this story by, Jacob's ladder. It was likely, in the ancient imagination, more of a ramp. The kind of ancient temples and ancient ziggurats, you'd have these big kind of ramps and have landing spaces, then a ramp higher and a ramp higher. But there's some sort of gateway from heaven and earth in which angels are going up and down. And Jacob is taking all of this in and doesn't notice God standing right next to him. He's watching all these angels, and the Lord has to speak to him before Jacob realizes God's presence. And I appreciate that the Lord does not begin by chastising Jacob. You could imagine all sorts of Jacob, it wasn't really nice what you did to your brother earlier. He doesn't go into any of that. Instead, God hints at God's protections, God's promises, what good things God can prophesy over Jacob's life. God tells him, you will be back here again. If you've ever taken a long journey, take comfort in knowing that you will return. God tells him you will have this land. God tells him you will have numerous offspring. He's going to find a spouse. So this is good news. You're going to find a spouse. You're going to have kids. And you and your kids will fill the earth. And all of the families of the earth will be blessed by you and your offspring. Jacob gets this magnificent prophecy over his life. And I got to let you know, Jacob doesn't probably take the best takeaways from this story. It's interesting that God can speak to you and you might not always know what to do with it. Maybe that's relatable. But Jacob has this encounter with God, and he assumes this place right here must be special. Like, this is the gateway of God. This is the holy place. I didn't realize I was at God's spot. This is truly the house of God. As if nowhere else will be the house of God. Just uniquely this spot will be the house of God. Something that I see in this text is the hope for us that there is no God-forsaken place. You might assume Jacob is on the run, that he doesn't deserve God's presence, that he has abandoned faithful living in his mischievous ways, and that he's tricked his brother, and he's on the run, and he's got no protection. But Jacob is in the midst of God's place, even on the run. I imagine for the ancient imagination, there was a lot of tribal deity imaginations, and this is my local God's place. And if I leave that place, I leave the protection of my God, and I'm at the whims of whatever powers might be. But Jacob is first experiencing that God's presence goes further than he expects. And some places in our lives might feel like God-forsaken places. Perhaps it's a hospital room after a bad diagnosis. Maybe it's a house that feels empty after death and loss. Maybe it's a relationship that feels gone after trust is broken. Maybe it's just a season when your prayers feel like they haven't been heard, where it feels like you only encounter silence. I think there's plenty of places that we are tempted to label God-forsaken places. And I don't think if we say that there are no God-forsaken places, that we have to say that all places are good. Some places are cruel and dangerous or unjust or hellish. God's presence doesn't mean that whatever happens in those places we have to just assume is good, but it means that we are not alone in our sufferings and our wanderings and our concerns, and that we are not unreachable. There is no unreachable place. Believing in God-forsaken places, if you go that route, that certainly there's somewhere that God just is not anywhere there. Now, I don't know with your rivalries if you want to make that Duke or North Carolina or where the God-forsaken places are. But the moment you allow God-forsaken places to take hold in your imagination, it is very easy to transform that thought into there are people that are God-forsaken people. And you begin to imagine that people whose theology or identity or family or nationality or politics or whatever is different about them, well, they surely live outside of the reach of God. The kingdom of Judah would later decide that worship is only right if it's in Jerusalem. And they declared that the northern kingdom of Israel was always corrupt because they worshiped in the wrong place. They worshiped in Dan and in Bethel. This place in this story that Jacob says, God is here, how magnificent is this place? Later, people are like, you know what? That's not the right place to worship God. The people that worship there are God-forsaken, no good, corrupt. I think that the story of Jesus reveals to us how much God has a heart for all people, all places. That Jesus was continually moving towards the outside of society, whoever was deemed unclean, immoral, inconvenient, beyond hope. And people have always struggled to understand, in the midst of Jesus' ministry to the outcasts, that even Jesus' last words get misunderstood when he cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The opening line of a psalm, of a song, of a poet, of a poem that leads to this buildup in which all of the nations of the world are worshiping God. The early Christians went so far when they made kind of creeds of like, what do we believe about who Jesus was, that the Apostles' Creed, probably of the 4th century or so, describes Jesus as born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried, and he descended into hell, and on the 3rd day rose again. I don't know about you, descended into hell stands out on that. Whatever it would mean for a place to be cut off from God, Jesus shows us that God somehow can invade and liberate even the gates of hellish nowhere, too. No matter what you're going through, no matter how alone you feel, abandonment is not the deepest truth of our lives. There is no God-forsaken place or person. And this was such good news for Jacob. And he doesn't take away the things that I would hope he would in this story. Jacob didn't deserve this meet and greet with God while he was fleeing. Jacob hadn't confessed. He hadn't repaired his relationships. He hadn't even promised to be a better person yet. And yet God shows up freely, generous with God's presence. And Jacob's takeaway from this is a little messed up. I have to tell you, I didn't read the end of the chapter. The lectionary cuts off. But I have to read for you Jacob's full response here. He called the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way, that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I might come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, God, I will surely give 1/10 to you." Jacob encounters a generous God who shows up with no strings attached, and Jacob adds a lot of strings. Jacob makes God's free grace into a transaction. You know, he was pretty good at transactions. He had stolen a birthright over one. And he's like, I'm going to make another transaction with God. God, if you give me everything I could ever want, then you will be my God. And then I'll give you some generosity back. I'll give you 1/10 of whatever you gave me. But it's not a great relationship. It's not a pinnacle of faith. It is someone still learning what it is to walk with a God who is the God of all places. And I think God has a subtle nudge to Jacob that I don't know that Jacob took as quickly as he should have. But God's presence turns wanderers into blessing spreaders. Jacob was the one who wanted to take blessings for himself. And God shows up to him and says, you will be a blessing to all people across the entire world. I don't know that Jacob wants that mission. I think he wants the reverse mission. Can the entire world just bless me? But God's mission to this blessing stealer is to help be a part of blessing all of the world. This chaser of individual blessings is invited to a greater story. And so this journey that he's on is not a journey just to kind of obtain stuff for himself, but how can you make this journey be a blessing for everybody that you encounter? Not just blessings for yourself. And I think about what is it to be people of God in this world? What is it to have a good news message to share with others? And I think that the Christian witness is not just imagining that you're carrying God into places that God isn't currently at work in, because God is at work everywhere. It is not that we are bringing God's presence in ways that did not yet happen before. It's not in just telling people truths or facts about who God is. But I think about the ways in which we can be a blessing to the people on our journeys as we wander, when we share our faith by sitting with people who are wandering through hard times and reminding them through our presence that they are not forgotten, they are not alone, they are not abandoned, that we share the blessing of God's presence with others. More so than factual truths all of the time, or just here's the way to live and do the right things, but helping people who feel lost and abandoned feel the presence of a good and generous and gracious God. And so today I invite you to reflect on what in your life feels God-forsaken. Because that's not a true thing. It is a misleading thought to imagine any parts of ourselves or our lives are God-forsaken. But I want to name that you can feel that way, and that those feelings are honest feelings. It might be a relationship, it might be a workplace, it might be part of your own story, it might be a part of who you think you are. Wherever you have labeled God-forsaken, I invite you to take one step towards showing up there with hope of what God can do, of not giving up on yourself, on others, whatever we feel is God-forsaken. Don't go believing you must fix everything. Go looking for signs that God is already present, and ask how your presence might be a blessing. Tomorrow is a special anniversary, July 20th. 57 years ago from tomorrow, 1969, Buzz Aldrin and Apollo 11 was making its way to the moon. And they did something that wasn't kind of on the kind of scheduled events for people to know about at the time, which was during their planned radio blackouts on the lunar module, they had brought with them a small vial of wine and wafers to take communion on the lunar surface, which I think is just an incredibly beautiful image that no matter where humans could go, venture off of this planet, and yet we receive and recognize God's presence is already there. And I don't know what feels like the moon for you, of like, how on earth could I ever get there? I don't know what that God-forsaken place could feel like. But remind yourself that it is not too far from God and is not too far from celebrating what could be. The wandering blessing is that every stage of your life journey, you are blessed with the presence of God and have the opportunity to bless those around you. We never wander beyond God's presence. And when we awaken to God's presence, we are called to become a blessing to everyone around us. Instead of making our journeys an escape from our problems, our conflicts, or whatever it is, take one small step towards showing up to God and to others instead of fleeing and hiding. That one small step can be a giant leap for your life. And I invite you to bring some bread and grapes with you to celebrate, because God is already there with you.